Before we start this video, if you enjoy my videos and this resonates with you as well, then definitely consider getting a natal chart reading, which is a reading in which I cover your personality and the way that you are perceived based on your placements, such as your sun, your moon, and your ascendant, as well as the meanings of your other signs and planets. And I've just finished three readings on astroseri.com from orders, and I've sent them out. So just letting you guys know that there are readings available, and I am doing those at this moment. Furthermore, if you enjoyed this video or any of my placements and they resonate, then you would definitely enjoy those. Without any further ado, let's talk about Saturn in Scorpio, which is the topic of this video. So with Saturn and Scorpio, debt, divorce, and factors that are out of one's control in life become the main cause of limitations and obstacles, because Saturn represents obstacles, limitations, and fears within our chart. And it's also about responsibilities and situations requiring patience or discipline. So sometimes in Scorpio, this placement shows trouble regarding taxes or situations regarding other people's money or regarding control and power dynamics and hierarchy in some way, because Scorpio is about power and it's about the hierarchy that comes with power. So in some ways, those that have Saturn and Scorpio, power dynamics become a limitation to them or a major theme of their life. And we'll talk about what it means to each of the houses, because the house shows more details about how power plays a role in their life and within their karma, their discipline and responsibilities. A lot of times when Saturn is in Scorpio, the profession can feel like slavery until they reach a position of control and sufficient authority, because Saturn is all about authority and Scorpio is all about control and power dynamics. So until you reach a certain position of success and respect and power of your own, it will feel like power dynamics become like a controlling obstacle in your life, because Saturn represents the obstacles that we face depending on its placement in our chart. So also Saturn represents the profession, and Scorpio can represent like slavery or like unpleasantness or things that we don't like, things that we are forced to do out of survival too, because Scorpio represents survival and it's about needs. So the next thing about Saturn and Scorpio is that it can give fear around death, loss, endings, and transformative moments. These people don't like transformation and they don't like for things to end, and sometimes Saturn will cause transformative moments where like unideal situation needs to come to an end or something in their life, and a lot of times that can take the place of like a divorce or like a bankruptcy or like some sort of like collapse in their life, financial or otherwise. Usually it's something that was meant to go though, and usually it's something that they might have been unnecessarily holding on to. Now, one's sense of authority becomes the challenging and transformative moments that they have faced in the past. So let me rephrase that. In other words, Saturn represents authority, and when you have it in Scorpio, your personal sense of authority will come as a result of all the challenging moments that you overcome in life, more so than the credentials that you acquire or like some sort of calculated or planned out path or something like that can come from like the education usually. So in other words, the real and rough and raw moments that you face become also your appeal towards authority, or I guess like, you know, what's the word for that? It becomes your credentials. So like, since Scorpio represents difficult or challenging moments, you know, Saturn represents authority, so you gain a lot of wisdom or importance due to what you've been through when you have this placement. Next, since Saturn can show fears, and when it's in Scorpio, which is the sign of sexuality and shame and taboo, there can be inhibitions regarding shame and sexuality, or there could be karma related to those things because Saturn represents karma. And sometimes Saturn in Scorpio creates perceived blockages towards one's desires. And only with time, dedication, and discipline, Saturn in Scorpio can reach a position of great wealth and influence. And they will create transformational moments in their careers, in their image, or in their success. Like rags to riches or seemingly overnight changes. But it's because people don't see all the time that went into those changes that it appears to be an overnight success. Generally, though, the potential for change and upgrade is massive when you have displacement of Saturn, because Saturn is about enormous or like monumental successes. And so when it's in Scorpio, it shows that your success will be a massive transformational moment. Like that's how it's going to look like because it's so influential. And the meanings of Scorpio and Saturn go well together because Saturn is about authority and importance, and Scorpio is all about power and influence. So those that have Saturn and Scorpio have this potential to become very influential or successful people, more than average. And so no matter what, when somebody has displacement, the person's success will feel like an overnight change. Perhaps because it is a night and day difference from where they were before. So that's the blessing of Saturn in Scorpio and like your success. Now let's talk about what Saturn in Scorpio means through each of the houses. If you have Saturn in Scorpio in the first house, this shows that the challenges of life have disciplined and hardened you. It also just shows that part of your personality is serious and you are like a hard-working individual, and discipline has often been required of you as a matter of survival. Saturn often manifests challenges that require you to exert effort and responsibility in order to get them handled when it's in the first house. And this type of situation has molded your character, or it has become an aspect of your character in some way, because the first house is about our character, our personality. Next, let's talk about the second house placement of Saturn in Scorpio. When Saturn is here, it creates financial limitations due to debt or unfavorable power dynamics in one's life and career. So that is the challenge that Saturn makes you face. And so essentially your responsibility or your discipline that you have to apply in order to succeed is you have to work hard in order to reach a sufficient level of influence and financial stability, which Saturn will reward you with for having discipline and, you know, taking the essential risks or assertive moments in order to succeed. Because Scorpio is quite assertive and it's about power, and Saturn is about hard work, so you have to climb the ranks in some way. And once you get to a certain position of respect and influence, the limitations to your finances go away, because those limitations likely come from an unfavorable power dynamic. And that can come from your career or your life situations. Next, we have the third house placement of Saturn, which creates inhibitions or limitations around speech, because the third house is about communication. And these inhibitions around speech or communication sometimes come in the form of like social anxiety or something, perhaps because of some sort of trauma or a psychologically related problem, because Scorpio is about psychology and it's also about trauma. So when Saturn is here, it shows that trauma or some sort of psychological problem or way of perceiving things creates fears around communication or speaking up. So often this placement manifests as a man or woman of few words. They can be shy or reluctant to speak out of a fear of revealing too much about themselves, or out of shame, or out of whatever they have to say being used against them, because Scorpio is about power dynamics. Now, also, the third house represents relationship to siblings. So Saturn here, which creates limitations, can show an unfavorable power dynamic amongst the siblings that, felt very limiting as a child, especially one where one of the siblings used authority to control things, or there could have been this competition over authority and control amongst siblings. Next, we have the fourth house placement of Saturn in Scorpio. And Saturn here can show trauma and secrets within the family, because the fourth house represents family. Scorpio represents secrets, trauma, taboo, and power struggles. So also this placement can show the person being subject to blackmail at some point in their life, and maybe it could have even come from one of the family members. But in general, there is an unfavorable family dynamic due to secrets, shame, sexual decisions, power dynamics, or repeating family tendencies. What some people might call family curses or stuff like that. But usually these are habits that have been ingrained from upbringing that the family members pass on unassumingly. Now, the mother was likely authoritative and controlling, and she imposed indebtedness and guilt within the child, because the fourth house represents our upbringing, and it represents the mother figure or the nurturing figure. So maybe it can be another family member too that played the nurturing role, whether that was the mother or the father. And finally, since Saturn represents challenges and limitations, and Scorpio represents death, in some cases, for some individuals that have this placement, if none of the other interpretations resonated, it would show that the loss of a family member created strenuous transformational moments for that person, or like a limiting situation in some way. Next, this takes us to the fifth house placement of Saturn in Scorpio. This placement shows that the power dynamic with an authority, or with authorities in general, stifled the person's confidence and ego. The person only feels confidence or authority in accordance to the respect others afforded them when Saturn is in Scorpio in the fifth house. And there is a boiling motivation to break free of this dynamic and to make large personal transformation or developments that will gain them more respect and autonomy. And in general, the person's confidence that has displacement improves with a position of influence or respect. Shame or fear around embarrassment could have caused an affliction to the individual's confidence, because Scorpio is about shame, and ultimately it could have driven them to very high heights. But also, Saturn is about limitations, and the fifth house is about confidence. So that's why the combination can show, limitations to one's confidence or self-expression. And ultimately, it could create this sensation of not being seen, for lack of confidence. Generally speaking, they will have a tendency to be quite controlling with their children. Whoever has these placements, because the fifth house is about children, and Saturn is authoritative, and finally Scorpio is controlling. Next, this takes us to the 6th house placement of Saturn in Scorpio. And so Saturn in Scorpio here creates an undesired feeling of servitude, because the 6th house is about servitude. And this can especially be the case towards one's work, because the 6th house is about work or routine. One's job or lifestyle can feel undesirably cyclical or like slave-like. They sense they will have to dedicate themselves towards completing their more menial tasks in order to patiently get to a position of sufficient influence to cut themselves off and to get to a sufficient position of personal freedom or control in their lives. They will feel like they have to dedicate themselves to very menial or like undesirable work. And sometimes these individuals will face or deal with constantly controlling or overly critical authority figures that will plague this person's workplace and plague their self-respect too. So until they reach a sufficient level of self-respect, they will feel that they might deserve to work in these environments or unfavorable circumstances, especially if it's like a means of survival. Because the 6th house is very mundane and it's about habits. So sometimes this undesirable situation can become a habit, or like it can become a norm to these people until they gain the sufficient power or respect or authority within their careers to break themselves free. So next, this leads us to the 7th house placement of Saturn in Scorpio. And this placement shows that a divorce or a separation leads towards a transformational moment. So if it's not a marriage ending, it could be a separation, because Scorpio is about endings. And something I didn't fully mention in the intro is that Saturn in Scorpio can create a forced ending in most cases. And that's because Saturn is about blockages and it forces things to happen. So with Scorpio, it's like an important forced ending. So when it's in the 7th house, this placement shows that relationships for the individual carry an undesirable power dynamic in which the person feels obligated to fulfill certain duties within the relationship. And the use of resources, blackmail, or power dynamics can be present within the relationship style. So these individuals might have to work through a toxic relationship, or that might come to an ending and create a transformational moment in which this person steps more into their authority. Now, if it's not within the relationships romantically, it would be especially towards the relationship towards a father or towards authority-like figures, because Saturn rules with authority figures. And when it's in the 7th house, there is a relationship to an authority figure, like a personal relationship that becomes important in the person's life, and it has a unpleasant power dynamic that motivates the individual to gain more influence or self-respect from the other person. So anyways, until the person receives a sufficient level of influence and power themselves, the dynamic of their relationships will always be in the other direction, where other people impose onto them. So this person learns to assert their own autonomy or like respect whenever they are born with Saturn in the 7th house and in Scorpio. So next, this leads us to the 8th house, which is the house of Scorpio. And when Saturn is in the 8th house and in Scorpio, this can show fear or shame around sex, death, taboo topics, or wrongdoings. Oftentimes it can show also debt. So debt can become an obstacle or responsibility that the person needs to rectify within their lives, and that it could become like the main limiting factor in their lives, because Saturn is about the things that limit us, and that require patience, time, or discipline to rectify. And it's also about our karma. So a lot of times with the 8th house, it's about debts. especially when it's Scorpio as well. And finally, it can be about wrongdoings. It can be about guilt, shame, or feeling indebted towards others. And, that is a situation that through time, discipline, and patience, they learn to heal. And, that might bring them great success as well in life. Now, next, we have the ninth house placement of Saturn in Scorpio. When Saturn is here, this shows a fearful relationship when it comes to religion or when it comes to superstitions. So either there's a lack of faith or there is a fear-based faith. These people can believe in religion from a fearful point of view at some point of their lives, especially upbringing for most individuals. But generally speaking, the ninth house is about faith, and Saturn limits things. So there can be difficulties around faith due to the fear of the unknown. On the other hand, so either they have fearful beliefs or they have difficulties around faith because of the mystery of the truth. Because Scorpio is about mystery. Whoopi Goldberg, an actress who has this position of Saturn, developed a fear of flying from witnessing a mid-air collision between two planes in San Diego, developing post-traumatic stress disorder in the process. And I find this is interesting because the ninth house rules travel and Scorpio represents death and Saturn is fear. So this placement can also, show a fear of the unknown or some sort of like faith-based fear. And finally, the last thing I have that I wanted to mention about this placement as a note is that this position can also show having an authoritative father figure or having authoritative teachers who used fear and beliefs as a control method. Because the ninth house is about gurus, it's about our father as well, and it's about teachers. So either one of those people could have often used fear and beliefs as a control method, and those that have this placement could have had a rigorous education or a religious education in some way that was difficult on their morality or something. Next, this leads us to the 10th house placement of Saturn in Scorpio. When Saturn is in Scorpio in the 10th house, this shows a difficult relationship towards authority where one must exert hard work in order to secure a position of sufficient influence and respect in order to overcome unfavorable circumstances and power dynamics within either their career or their government or within society or something of that nature. And in order to assert their own autonomy and authority over themselves, they need to work hard to prove themselves or gain that influence. Because Saturn in Scorpio shows an unfavorable power dynamic, starts out as being the limitation in our lives. So essentially, these individuals work hard to achieve power and respect of their own, as early on in life, those things may have felt absent in strong ways. And it's interesting that after writing this interpretation, I looked up placements of Saturn in the 10th house, and I noticed Marie Curie, a physicist, chemist, and Nobel Peace Prize winner in physics, who was the first woman to win a Nobel Peace Prize, had this placement in the 10th house as well, and tightly conjunct to Venus, which is the planet that rules femininity and women. Hence why she not only played this role for herself, but ended up playing a major role as a figure to gain respect for women as a whole. Incredible. Next, this takes us to Saturn and Scorpio in the 11th house. This placement shows gaining the power in order to be self-reliant becomes the main challenge or responsibility in life. Because life might start out with unfavorable power dynamics that limit their own individuality or freedom. The 11th house is about freedom, autonomy, and individuality as well. So there is a theme of needing to overcome shame regarding one's individuality in some cases. Unfavorable circumstances, life events, or power dynamics that force the individual to become more autonomous and stand in their authority tend to be the theme of Saturn in Scorpio in the 11th house. The 11th house was traditionally ruled by Saturn, and nowadays it's considered ruled by Uranus, which represents autonomy and rebellion. And Saturn in the 11th house represented our personal authority as individuals. So the ability to stand up for ourselves. Saturn can still be used to signify the 11th house in powerful ways within the chart. And generally speaking, this placement is about gaining the power or influence to stand alone. And in some ways, it reminds me of the 10th house placement of Saturn in Scorpio, because Saturn rules both of the 10th house and the 11th house traditionally. And I recommend listening to the 10th house Saturn in Scorpio placement, because that one will likely carry complementary messages to the 11th house placement. Saturn in Scorpio in the 11th house is also about change and transformation, because the 11th house is ruled by Uranus in modern times, which is about shocking change or unexpected change. And Scorpio is about transformation. So essentially, Saturn in Scorpio in the 11th house might cause a circumstance or a need to face the fear of making a major personal change in order to get in alignment with their individuality, or to stand up for themselves and, gain autonomy and respect in order to get out of a controlling situation, which can either be financial or social or otherwise. Finally, this leads us to Saturn in Scorpio in the 12th house. Saturn in the 12th house mostly can manifest as fears, because the 12th house is about everything that's non-tangible, and Saturn is about limitations. So it can create limiting perceptions or limiting, fears. And Scorpio is all about death, mystery, and loss and endings. So this placement of Saturn can show fears around loss, fears around the unknown, fears around spirituality, ghosts, superstitions, and fearful assumptions. Scorpio is about psychology, so it can show having a troubled psychology and making fearful assumptions, perhaps having a perception that is pessimistic in some ways, especially because of fear of the unknown or of what is not seen and what cannot be predicted, or what is greater than common reality, because the 12th house is everything that's greater than what we can see or notice or predict. It's all about synchronicities and, events that align in the perfect ways. And usually it's an optimistic house, especially if there's placements like Jupiter here. But generally speaking, though, the 12th house is considered a malefic house. Neptune and Jupiter and the 12th house, they can show positive delusions as well. They can show faith, they can show optimism. But anyway, when Saturn is here, it's like negative perceptions, negative assumptions instead of optimism. This placement can be summarized as sometimes paranoia or an unreasonable fear of being taken advantage of, because the 12th house is about victimhood or vulnerability. And I've seen in the opposite sign of Taurus, when Saturn is in the 12th house in Taurus, which is opposing the mirror sign of Scorpio, there's a similar effect, except the fear is around money and lack of resources that inhibits the person's dreams or their optimism. This 12th house placement of Saturn in Scorpio can show intentionally or unintentionally blocked spiritual gifts out of a fear of them. It can sometimes show blocked spirituality and vulnerability, this unwillingness to be open and vulnerable that can sometimes feel limiting. in cases where vulnerability would be beneficial. And that's because the 12th house is about being vulnerable, but also open-minded and sometimes, delusional. But in this case, the delusion becomes Saturn, because Saturn is the planet that's in the 12th house. And this represents fear and limitations and like boxed thinking. So a lot of times those that have Saturn in the 12th house in Scorpio will have a fear of hell, fear of being trapped, fear of being controlled by undesirable circumstances, or like a fear of imprisonment, and sometimes of just being taken advantage of in general by life circumstances or by people in life. So that is Saturn in Scorpio through each of the houses. This resonated and you enjoy my videos, don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe to this channel to see more of your placements when they come out. But that is going to wrap up what I have for today. I will talk to you sometime soon in another post. Thanks for watching.